If your blood sugar stays high after meals, you've probably been told the same thing. You ate too many carbs. And at first glance, that seems obvious. You eat oatmeal, fruit, rice, potatoes, or beans, and your blood sugar rises. You eat eggs, bacon, and cheese, and it barely moves. So the conclusion feels automatic. Carbohydrates are the problem. Cut them out, and you're good. But that conclusion is incomplete. And for many people, it's the exact belief keeping them stuck for years. Because the real question isn't why did that food contain carbs? The real question is why did the glucose stay in your bloodstream instead of moving into your muscles? That one question changes everything. If you want our free guide that breaks down what's really driving your blood sugar high and what it takes to actually reverse it, comment guide below and we'll send it straight to you. After you eat, your bloodstream is not supposed to be a parking lot for glucose. It's supposed to be a highway. Glucose enters, insulin signals the tissues, and glucose moves into the cells that need it most. And the biggest destination? Your skeletal muscle. Your muscles aren't just for walking, lifting, or climbing stairs. They are one of the most important metabolic organs in your entire body. In a healthy, insulin-sensitive state, muscle acts like a massive glucose sink. You eat carbohydrate-rich whole foods, glucose enters the bloodstream, insulin rises, and muscle cells absorb it, storing it as glycogen or burning it for energy. That is normal physiology. That is what your body is designed to do. So, when your blood sugar stays high after meals, the problem isn't simply that glucose entered the bloodstream. The problem is that the largest glucose sink in your body isn't opening properly. Your muscles are present, but metabolically, they're not absorbing glucose the way they should. That is insulin resistance. Here's the part most people are never told. Type 2 diabetes is not primarily a disease of carbohydrate exposure. It's a disease of impaired carbohydrate handling. Those are completely different things. Carbohydrate exposure means you ate a food that breaks down into glucose. Carbohydrate handling means your body can move that glucose out of the bloodstream and into the cells efficiently. Most diabetes advice focuses almost entirely on reducing exposure. Eat fewer carbs, avoid fruit, avoid potatoes, avoid rice, avoid anything that raises the number. But that's like having a clogged drain and deciding to never turn on the faucet again. It prevents the overflow, but the clog is still there. In your body, eating carbohydrates is what turns on the faucet. Insulin sensitivity is the drain, and the clog is largely excess fat interfering with glucose uptake in your muscle and liver cells. The goal isn't to avoid the faucet forever. The goal is to clear the drain. This is exactly why low-carb diets can appear to work in the short term. If you eat very little carbohydrate, less glucose enters the bloodstream. The numbers look flatter, but that doesn't mean your muscles became more insulin sensitive. It may simply mean the system wasn't challenged. The glucose didn't pile up because there was less glucose coming in, but the drain may still be just as clogged as before. And if the low-carb meal is also high in fat, especially saturated fat, it can actually make the underlying insulin resistance worse over time. That is the trap. A meal can look good on a glucose monitor and still be moving the body away from carbohydrate tolerance. It can suppress the symptom while feeding the cause. That's why we have to stop confusing short-term glucose suppression with reversal. Reversal means the body becomes better at using glucose. Suppression means the body has less glucose to deal with. Those are not the same thing. A 2019 study published in Scientific Reports examined what happened when 42 healthy, non-obese men consumed a low-carbohydrate, high-fat diet for just 3 days. Crucially, they were not overeating. Calorie intake stayed the same. This isolated the effect of diet composition itself. Before and after, researchers measured intramuscular lipid, fat stored inside muscle cells, and assessed insulin action using a clamp test, the gold standard method for measuring how well the body disposes of glucose under insulin-stimulated conditions. After just 3 days on the low-carb, high-fat diet, insulin clearance increased by about 10%, steady-state insulin during the clamp decreased by about 10%, and glucose infusion rate dropped by about 6%. Here's what that last number means. During a clamp study, researchers infused glucose to see how much the body can absorb under controlled insulin conditions. A higher glucose infusion rate means tissues, especially muscle, are pulling glucose in efficiently. A lower rate means the opposite. After 3 days of low-carb, high-fat eating, the glucose infusion rate was lower. The muscles were not acting as strongly as a glucose sink. And remember, these were healthy, non-obese men, not people with diabetes, not people gaining weight. 3 days of diet composition alone was enough to shift key markers of insulin-mediated glucose disposal. In high responders, the researchers also found increased intramuscular lipid, more fat accumulating inside muscle cells. And that matters because when fat-derived molecules build up inside muscle cells, they can disrupt the insulin signaling pathway. Insulin knocks, but the message doesn't travel properly. Glucose transporters don't show up at the cell surface. Glucose stays in the bloodstream. That is the physiology behind the phrase, "my blood sugar spiked." If this is starting to click and you want the full breakdown of how to reverse this, comment guide below. We'll send you our free guide to the Mastering Diabetes Method. Here's the reframe that changes everything. Your post-meal blood sugar is not just a food score. It's a muscle function test. When glucose rises and stays elevated after a meal, yes, the food mattered, but it's only one side of the equation. The other side is your disposal system. How responsive were your muscle cells to insulin? How much glycogen storage capacity is available? How much fat is interfering with insulin signaling? How metabolically active is that tissue? Most diabetes advice talks only about the food coming in. Very little talks about the tissue receiving it. But glucose control is not just about the entrance, it's about the exit. This is also why two people can eat the exact same bowl of oats and have completely different responses. One person returns to baseline smoothly. The other stays elevated for hours. The oats aren't the explanation. The difference is insulin sensitivity. The difference is how well the muscle sink is working. And this is why people end up afraid of fruit, beans, potatoes, and oats, the very whole food carbohydrates that can be part of restoring insulin sensitivity when eaten within the right, low-fat, high-fiber dietary pattern. Here's the liver connection to blood sugar no one mentions. Your liver is the overnight glucose manager. It stores and releases glucose to keep your body fueled between meals and while you sleep. When insulin sensitivity is healthy, insulin signals the liver to dial back glucose output when blood sugar is already adequate. But when the liver becomes insulin resistant, it keeps releasing glucose even when blood sugar is already elevated. This is why people wake up with high fasting glucose even after eating a very low-carb dinner the night before. They think they did something wrong, but the issue isn't last night's meal. It's hepatic insulin resistance. The liver isn't hearing insulin's signal clearly. So now you have two problems working together. The liver is putting too much glucose into the blood. The muscle isn't pulling enough glucose out. That's the traffic jam. And focusing only on carbohydrates misses the entire metabolic intersection. Now let's talk about containment versus true reversal. Many people eventually feel the difference, even if they can't name it. They say, I can keep my numbers controlled, but only if I keep cutting more foods. The second I eat fruit or beans, my blood sugar goes crazy. Or my fasting glucose keeps creeping up, even though I'm barely eating any carbs. That's not reversal. That's containment. And containment becomes exhausting. It makes you afraid of restaurants, family meals, travel, and your own body. True reversal is when your body can handle whole food carbohydrates again, not because you tricked the meter, but because the machinery actually works better. A low-fat, plant-based, whole food dietary pattern, rich in fiber, legumes, intact whole grains, fruit, and starchy vegetables, works not because it hides glucose, but because it addresses the environment inside the cell. It reduces excess dietary fat, it lowers saturated fat exposure, it increases fiber, it supports gut fermentation and short-chain fatty acid production, and over time, it helps muscle and liver become more responsive to insulin. That is the goal. Not a flat line because you avoided carbs, but a more capable metabolism because you restored insulin sensitivity. If your blood sugar rises after eating whole food carbohydrates today, that rise is real. This isn't about pretending Glucose doesn't matter. But the interpretation is what changes. A blood sugar rise after a carbohydrate-rich meal doesn't prove that carbohydrates caused your diabetes. It proves your body currently has carbohydrate intolerance. And carbohydrate intolerance is the result of insulin resistance, not the cause of it. When people treat the symptom as the cause, they spend their lives avoiding carbohydrates. When they understand the cause, they can work toward restoring carbohydrate tolerance. Your current response is not your permanent identity. It's a metabolic state, and metabolic states can change. Insulin resistance can improve. Muscle glucose uptake can improve. Liver insulin sensitivity can improve. Carbohydrate tolerance can improve. We've seen it again and again. People who were once afraid of fruit, oats, beans, and potatoes, who believed their bodies simply couldn't handle those foods, found that when they addressed insulin resistance at the root, the same foods that once felt impossible became part of a stable, satisfying, healthy lifestyle. Not because the foods changed, because the body changed. The glucose sink started working again. So the next time your blood sugar stays high after a meal, don't think I'm weak or carbs are poison or I failed again. Think my muscles aren't clearing glucose efficiently right now. Why? And what needs to change? That is a completely different emotional experience. It's not shame, it's physiology. It's not a life sentence. It's a signal that the root cause needs to be addressed. The low-carb approach told you to turn off the faucet. Nobody told you how to clear the drain. That's the trap. And now you can see it. Again, if you want our free guide to the Mastering Diabetes Method, comment guide below, because you don't need another list of foods to fear. You need to understand why your muscles stopped acting like a glucose sponge, what insulin resistance is doing inside your body, and what it actually takes to restore carbohydrate tolerance again. If this video helped you, hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who may benefit. Until next time, keep those carbs high and that A1C low.